The Eminence in Shadow Season 2 has wrapped up quite recently, and the only downside to this season is that it was much more shorter than Season 1. I've been a huge fan of this series ever since it came out last year, and I think a lot of people have really just grown to enjoy this series as more episodes came out. Originally, the first couple of episodes had a lot of negative reception, and that's mainly due to the fact of the main protagonist, Sid/Shadow. A lot of people found him cringy and trying so hard to be edgy, which, don't get me wrong, I do understand where the criticisms came from, but once you watch the entire series, you then start to understand why he is like this, because in reality he's always been like this even before he got isekai. So that was like pretty much the main thing of season 1, was just to simply introduce us to Shadow and what to expect of him. Season 2 on the other hand is a completely different story because it mainly focused on the world building of Eminence and Shadow. Now I know some people aren't huge fans of animes or series doing this whole world building thing because they find it boring or they find it unnecessary to the story, but in some cases world building is extremely important for a series to progress, and Eminence and Shadow is one of those series. There were many different locations shown in season 2, and this is important because it progressed the ongoing battle between the Shadow Garden and the Cult of Diablos, which is still a real threat even if Shadow is completely ignorant of that. And it shows us that no matter what, this Cult of Diablos has a lot of influence in many different locations in this world, which is something that is very serious because it just shows us just how powerful this group is and just how many people are involved in this group. Of course, it isn't always like this. Like in the first arc, this being the vampire/lawless city arc, we actually don't focus too much on the Cult of Diablos. We actually focus on this city known as the Lawless City, and as the name suggests, is pretty much a city that's filled with criminals, and how there's different factions that pretty much run this entire city. And it just goes to show us just how a city can turn into if the people in power choose to ignore certain locations. It could end up being a huge deal because if a city has no authority, then you just know that people are just simply going to do whatever they want. And to be more brief, Lawless City literally reminds me of Gotham City from Batman. If you have watched any of the media relating to Batman, once you compare both of these cities, you just see a lot of similarities with them. But anyways, apart from the Lawless City arc, there was the whole situation with the vampires during the whole Red Moon crisis. I kind of like how the anime actually made this much more better than the light novels, because I actually did read this arc in light novel format, and I gotta say that the anime did improve a lot of the scenes during this arc, because I feel like there were moments in the series that slowed the flow of this storyline, because there were moments in which there was discussions that were made during very intense situations that I feel just ruined the pacing of what was going on. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with having discussions during intense battles, but I feel like some of these discussions were really not necessary and they weren't that important. Like, yes, sometimes discussions are used to improve characters or make more character development, but that wasn't the case for some of these discussions. So I'm glad that the anime either took these discussions away or they actually did change when these discussions happen in order to not ruin the pace of the story. And speaking of characters, I really did enjoy the whole story involving the vampires as well as with Yukime. Starting with the vampires, I really did enjoy how they actually gave us a very interesting backstory to these creatures. Who are they? Why did they become the way they became? And why certain vampires, despite them being vampires, are also vampire hunters as well. It's very interesting to see just how one arc alone made us care for a certain group of characters, this being the vampires. I don't think a lot of series can even be able to do it, because most of the time the series tends to not really focus on these kind of things, but it's these little details that really makes the world of Eminence and Shadow all the more great to see. And then you have Yukime, which is probably the biggest character that I was really excited to see finally get animated. She was introduced in the Lawless City arc, but she actually became more important later on. Like, she wasn't just a one and done character, like she will actually become very important for the other arcs as well. But her story as to why she became the person she became and her whole history between another character that goes by the name of Geton was really something really interesting to see. But as well as her entire personality was also something that was worth showing, because she isn't stupid, she actually is very quite smart, and her entire dynamic with Shadow/Sid was very funny to see, because you have somebody that is actually very intelligent somehow not finding out how Sid/Shadow tends to not really know what is actually going on around him. Like, just to show an example, after the Lawless City arc, Sid has this master plan to make a ton of money, and this is by pulling scams, basically using counterfeit bills, which is something that is not completely unrealistic, because even in the real world this kind of stuff does happen. But of course not everything goes according to plan, because you have characters like Yukime who think that he has some sort of other ulterior motive into doing this, where in reality that's not the case whatsoever. Sid just is simply doing all this just to make money. Of course, she wasn't the only one to think like this. There was also Shadow Garden as well that believed that he had had like this very master plan in doing all this, but that's not really the case. And speaking of this, I still really enjoy how Sid is still portrayed as this mastermind, but if you actually watch the series, you will know that everything is just sheer luck or just a huge coincidence. Like nothing Sid ever plans goes accordingly. Like there's always something else happening, and then of course this results in the other characters believing that this was all according to plan and that he just knew this was going to happen. I like how this running joke is still going on. I know some people were probably expecting it to get boring or very irritating to see, but if you have watched Overlord, they also use this same structure as well, where you have moments in which Ainz is shown as to be this very 4D chess player that knows every enemy's moves and what they're going to do and can predict everything that's going to happen, but in reality Ainz has no idea what is going on and is just simply following whatever the other characters are doing or just doing his own thing. That's exactly what is going on with Eminence in Shadow. That's not to say that it doesn't have its serious moments or emotional moments, but when those moments actually happen, it just jumps right back to the comedy, which I know for some people the way I'm describing it sounds like it's just being forced, but that is not the case. It actually happens quite naturally. It just goes to show us that the series can be emotional and can be serious at times when it wants to, like when Alpha believed that Sid/Shadow betrayed the entire group and was responsible for Delta's disappearance. Any other character in this series would have viewed this as very emotional, very impactful, and very serious, where in reality that is not the case, because we all know what Sid's plan was, and we know this was all part of his roleplay, because I mean he even said it himself that he wanted to do a scenario in which the group felt like he betrayed them, and in reality he has some sort of other plan and has a reason why he quote unquote betrayed the group. It's very clear that Sid does all this just for roleplay, and another example is during the whole battle between Yukime and Geton, when she wants to fulfill her revenge but she chooses not to, and in return Geton attacks her when she least expects it, and then of course out of nowhere Sid/Shadow shows up. And while in any other series it may seem emotional because it seems like he's there to protect Yukime from this harm, in reality Sid is there because he believes that Geton stole his money, and when he is beating up Geton by telling him to tell him the truth, Geton believes this is Shadow telling him to tell him how he actually feels about Yukime and what he has become. And it's very emotional because it seems that Geton and Yukime had once a great relationship, but it all was completely destroyed after an incident that happened in their village that they used to live in. Would be seen as very emotional and gives us a clear understanding to this character, and maybe for some people it changed our opinions to this character, but in the back of your head you just know that this is not what Sid had intended to do. The reason why he wanted him to tell him the truth was that fact that he wanted him to tell him where the money that he supposedly stole was. And this moment actually becomes even more funny when Geton tells Shadow to take care of Yukime for him. You just know that Sid could care less about anything that is going on right now and just simply cares about getting his money back. Again, these scenes are supposed to be emotional, very impactful, very serious, but you also have to keep in mind that this is Eminence in Shadow. Our protagonist is only focused on himself, and the other people around him are just secondary to him. Like he does not really pay attention to any of the other characters in this series unless he has to or is part of his plan. Then he'll pay attention to these other characters. If not, he's just in his own world doing his own things. And of course we can't forget about the final arc of this season, and this being the whole situation with Rose and her kingdom. I really do enjoy how they actually spent more time with Rose towards the end of this series, because she had the spotlight also towards the end of season 1, in which we come to find out that she and her kingdom are in trouble, and we see that she had to kill her father, this being the king, because he was already being used by the cult of Diablos. But of course she was then labeled as a murderer and a criminal for what she did, so of course it made us wonder what was going to happen with her character. And very quickly we were able to see this in season 2, in which we see that Rose now has to marry this individual, which I can't say his name because we're on YouTube, which this individual tells her that if she wants to save her kingdom and her remaining family, this being her mother, then she has to marry him, only for her to find out that he has no intentions in doing that, and in fact her remaining family, this being her mother, is in on the plan with him. Like she is involved in this plan, and it's very clear the mother has no care for what happens to her daughter as long as she gets benefits from this plan, which is pretty messed up because she did a lot of things in order to try to save her kingdom. She literally joined Shadow take on it because she felt that if she joined this organization, she was going to get stronger. But when she saw that some members of her organization was about to kill her mother during one of her missions, she actually stopped them, and this of course led to her being called the traitor, showing us that Rose's journey hasn't been great. And for her to find out what was happening to her once she got married and that her mother was in on it, I think this was something that was very hard to accept. But of course she will be able to stand her ground once Shadow is involved, making her realize that she is basically the only person that can actually save her kingdom if she wants to. I think the biggest, most memorable moment of this season was the very end, because we not only come to find out that there are different worlds, but it is actually possible to be entering these different kinds of worlds, which of course leads us to the biggest cliffhanger, and is the fact that Shadow is able to return back to his original world. This of course being Earth, aka Japan. Although very quickly we are able to see just how different Japan is now that he has returned. It seems that it's now become more futuristic, although it's most likely going to be explained more in the future as to how Japan became what it became. But overall, that was a really good cliffhanger. I know some people aren't huge fans of cliffhangers because that means that they have to wait until the next season to find out what is going on, but I do enjoy cliffhangers, and you don't have to worry because after season 2 ended and the final episode aired, it has already been announced that there's a movie in development. So we're going to have a Eminence and Shadow movie that's going to focus on Shadow going back to his original world, and I'm very excited to see what's going to happen now that Shadow is back to the place where it all began. And based on discussions that I have seen online, this movie is going to cover the rest of the volume 4, so it's pretty much going to be covering the entirety of volume 4, meaning that now there's only 2 more light novels that are left to cover. But of course, as you all know, movies take a long time to make, mostly a year. I say at least they'll take a year at least to make this movie, so there's still enough time for more light novels to come. The only reason why I'm saying this because for those who don't know, there's only 6 volumes available right now, and of course now that they're finishing volume 4, they're not going to probably have enough material for another season. So I think it was a really smart idea to adapt the rest of volume 4 in a movie format. That way they have enough time to not only adapt the entirety of volume 4, but also they have time now to see if there's more content that they could use in the near future. So yeah, once again, overall, season 2 of Eminence and Shadow, 10 out of 10. I wish there were more episodes, but I think with the movie now, I think it's very smart what they did. It really does show us that the people behind Eminence and Shadow do care about the source material. I mean, they have been adapting it very well, and in fact, they have improved certain scenes and moments from the original source, which is always great to see because it shows us that the people behind the series do care about it. Hopefully, it stays like that in the near future as well. So yeah, that's pretty much my entire video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.